So the jury found Kyle Rittenhouse not guilty. It's a verdict we must accept, but hopefully also learn from, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So, a Wisconsin jury found Kyle Rittenhouse not guilty on all counts, and we must accept the jury's verdict. I can tell you, friends, on more than one occasion, I've had to stand on the courthouse steps after losing a trial and saying that the government, the prosecutors, accept the not guilty verdict, even if we disagree with it. So today I wrote a piece for MSNBC Daily, MSNBC's online opinion page, about the Kyle Rittenhouse result. And here's the headline: Kyle Rittenhouse's not guilty verdicts make perfect sense in America's judicial system. Before I talk about what I mean by that, I want to talk about a couple of the things about this trial that really bothered me. In particular, the judge. The judge set the tone early on by saying to the prosecutors, you may not call the gunshot victims, the people who were shot, two of whom were killed by Kyle Rittenhouse, you may not call them victims because that's a loaded term. And then he turned to the defense attorneys and said, but you may call them rioters and looters and arsonists. You may use those conclusory, derogatory slurs to refer to the human beings who were shot and killed. But government, prosecutor, you may not use the loaded term victim, even though they were clearly gunshot wound victims. That set the tone early on, and it treated the parties unfairly. It gave Kyle Rittenhouse's defense team an advantage. That's just one of the many things that concerned me deeply about the way this Judge Schroeder, handled the trial. But rather than go on for a couple of hours critiquing so much of what Judge Schroeder did, let me talk about another aspect of the trial. It is perhaps an understatement to say that different people viewed this case, viewed the evidence through very different lenses. Here's what I wrote about that. Some people hail Rittenhouse as a vigilante hero of sorts, a free agent crime fighter determined to protect property and promote order in a city taken over by lawless rioters, while others viewed Rittenhouse as a young racist with an itchy trigger finger who opened fire without cause on people who were protesting police abuse. This latter view paints the shooting victims as heroes who were chasing down and trying to disarm an active shooter after Rittenhouse fired his assault-style rifle at the first victim. So yes, different people, different factions viewed this case through very different lenses. But in my opinion, at the bottom of it all, here's why Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted by the jury. It's because of the law of self-defense. The law of self-defense says that once there's any evidence introduced at trial that the defendant might have acted in self-defense, then it is the prosecution's burden to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. And when I saw Kyle Rittenhouse testify that he believed he was at risk of death or serious bodily injury when he was being pursued, attacked, assaulted by the protesters, by the victims, and he believed he needed to use force, including deadly force, to repel the attack, I knew it was going to be very difficult for the prosecution to carry its burden of disproving self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. Because here's how that works. Ordinarily, defense attorneys will argue to a jury, ladies and gentlemen, you might think my client is probably guilty. That means you must vote not guilty, because probably doesn't cut it. Probably is not a conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed the offenses with which he is charged. You may think my client is likely guilty. That means you must vote not guilty. You may think my client is very likely guilty, and therefore you must vote not guilty, because that does not satisfy the extraordinarily high evidentiary burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I've heard those arguments made hundreds of times by defense attorneys, and they're appropriate, legitimate, and often very persuasive arguments, because it's hard to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. When we saw the videotapes, we heard the testimony, and even if we strongly suspect that Kyle Rittenhouse provoked this, he brought it on himself, I still knew it was going to be a very dicey proposition for the prosecutor to carry his burden, and he couldn't. The jury acquitted Kyle Rittenhouse. And yes, that may be the prevailing law of self-defense in Wisconsin, in D.C., very similar self-defense laws, and in many jurisdictions across the country. But for goodness sake, let's ask ourselves, how many times have we seen shootings of unarmed individuals only to have the gunman claim he was acting in self-defense? Frankly, that prompted me to write this in today's piece. It's a deadly cycle that seems to have America in its grips. One can't help but feel that we are forever sacrificing men and women, boys and girls, in our country's determination to worship at the altar of unrestricted gun rights, unrestricted gun access. Kyle Rittenhouse was a juvenile with an assault rifle inserting himself into a volatile situation. So friends, let me finish with this regarding the Rittenhouse verdict. Regardless of how we may feel about the result, born of politics, tribalism, sympathy, or antipathy for one party or another, we must accept the jury's verdict. But it does raise questions about the wisdom of unrestricted gun access and the way self-defense is defined in this country, especially when the fight is seemingly, hopelessly lopsided. Specifically, with a juvenile wielding an AR-15 assault rifle. Friends, as always, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.